A while back, I gave a discussion on embrace being the bad guy is kind of what I talked to you guys about. It's been a while since we've had that sort of conversation, but the thing that you want to understand is this. When I say embrace being the bad guy, it's not because I want you to go out and commit crimes. I don't want you to make victims of other people. Basically, the current culture that we have, and I'm talking about the African American community, the subculture. In this subculture, the typical conformist behavior, a person like myself who advocates stability, respectability, adherence to societal norms, I'm considered the bad guy, you see? And it's a paradigm shift that occurs where roles of good and bad are reversed. In this context, okay, individuals who support or engage in behaviors that are dysfunctional or deviant as per mainstream society, they're celebrated as the good guys, while those who uphold traditional values and traditional norms are cast as the villains. This is actually it's an inversion of societal expectations, and it creates a warped and twisted dynamic where people embrace dysfunction and conformity is scorned, okay? And in this particular type of subculture, the good guys, okay, the good guys are those who challenge the status quo and reject conventional standards of what is norm. And even though their rejection of what's normal is actually deviant and unconventional. So here's the thing, okay? People like me, we're the bad guys for a reason, okay? But see, the good guys in the black community, in that subculture, they may engage in things like substance abuse, criminality, behavior, and other sorts of rebellious behavior against the traditional norms. And rather than be condemned for it, their actions are seen as resistant against the system, okay? What they would deem an oppressive and unjust system. And what I'm talking about, folks, is I'm talking about the subculture or the Black American culture. Because see, right now, the architect, the engineer, the doctor, and the lawyer are treated as though they are the lames. They're treated as though they are weak. They're treated as though they're out of the norm. Whereas the degenerates, the Pookies, the Ray Rays, and I'm not saying this is across the board, but the degenerates are given, they're venerated, they're uplifted. That's why people will celebrate you coming out of prison, but when you graduate from college, they'll say stuff like, oh, you think you're better than us, or they won't celebrate you at all. They'll just ignore it. And so, because I'm a non-conformist to the subculture, it makes me a bad guy. But in political terms, it would make me a radical, okay? Somebody type radical in the chat room, okay? But in reality, the dominant culture, which is patriarchal for the most part, it's capitalistic, it believes in traditional values, it's about family, it's about God, it's about hard work, all the stuff that makes a country functional goes against what the subculture is about. How do I know? Well, look at the African American subculture. We got an out of wedlock birth rate. We have an STD rate, which is astronomical, which signifies what? We're definitely not pro-traditional families because we're having too many children out of wedlock. We're definitely not into what God says because look at all the unaliving we do in the black community. Look at all the how can you have that many STDs if you're abiding by what the good word says? I mean, this is just something you need to think about. The dominant culture, right, is not that loud. The subculture is loud. And that also goes in the dominant culture. And when I say the dominant culture, I'm talking about the people, the subculture of the dominant culture. I should say the predominant subculture of the dominant culture. This is somebody type rainbow in the chat room. So the rainbow people with the pronouns, the eminism, the transformer rights, those type of people, they vilify patriarchy. They vilify masculinity. They call it toxic. They vilify capitalism. These are the sort of things that make this country great, but they vilify all those things because they're part of the subculture. Okay. Now, what's happened is some parts of the Black American subculture have linked up with some parts of the dominant culture subculture, and they've come together. But here's the thing you got to understand: at its core, America is not about that subculture. The subculture is represented by a tiny minority, but the vast majority of people, the vast members, both black, white, Asian, Hispanic, whatever, therefore, those things that I advocate for. So as far as the black community is concerned, I might be the bad guy. But as far as the rest of the country and the rest of the world, I'm in the numerical majority. And so that's why I embrace being the bad guy. Okay? I have no problem with it. In fact, I've begun to realize that this current black community that we have is not even the black community that we had in the 1950s. It's not even the black community that we had in the 1960s. We have a subculture which is so rotten that if you abide by it and you adhere to its norms, you are bound for failure. You see, if you decide that you want to be cheered and hoorayed by the subculture, which is the black community or the dominant members of the black subculture, and you're going to end up in prison somewhere. Okay? That's what I've realized. So at what point, why does it even make any sense to be a conformist to that subculture? And this is what we're dealing with. So you guys, that's my introduction. And now we're going to explain the ramifications of embracing that subculture, because it needs to be understood. Now, you guys put bad guy in the chat room, okay? You put bad guy in the chat room. Some of you guys are the bad guy. Recently, I put a video out about how the young woman, whose name is Cassie, says she should take responsibility for the fact that she chose to be with Sean Combs, who turned out to be the type of man that we don't want our daughters to be with. Right? We can agree with that. Why would you choose a man who is known to be an abuser of women? Why would you do that? Take some accountability. But guess what? The African-American subculture, which is oftentimes dominated by the lovely ladies and the simps that want to score points with them, they came out in droves. And they talked about my looks. They talked about my size. They talked about everything they could. But the bottom line is they couldn't argue with the facts of the matter. Accountability is something that we've always pushed. We as a people have always been accountable. We felt accountable for our, or maybe it wasn't our fault, but we knew that we had to get ourselves up out of Jim Crow, so we fought for that. Fresh out of enslavement, we had to put institutions together, be it churches, universities, schools, neighborhoods, businesses, systems of transportation, and we did that for ourselves because we took responsibility for that. Now, these days, you can't even get one of these lovely ladies to accept responsibility for a child that they allowed some man to impregnate them with. And so how far we've fallen. But see, again, that's that degenerate subculture. See, that's the subculture that they adhere to. And that's what we have to get away from. Now, here's the thing. when you're in a situation and you have a distinct ethnic group that embraces a subculture, the one that I described other, there's going to be where they're challenging the status quo and they're rejecting conventional standards of behavior, and that's actually celebrated. This ethnic group, okay, this ethnic group who adopts this collective identity and prioritizes, we'll say, resistance against societal norms that they perceive oppressive or unjust, they're going to have some problems. Somebody type problems in the chat room. Now, there's some benefits to it. Number one, there's going to be cultural cohesion, because embracing a subculture that values non-conformity and rebellion, that can foster a strong sense of solidarity and belonging. And we have that in the Black community, or at least we did, because it was like we're brothers and sisters. In fact, many of us refer to each other as brothers and sisters. They don't say it too much often now, but for the most part, in the 1960s and the 70s, when we embraced the subculture, there was a deep connection that we had with each other. And it was based on a shared sense of values, a common adversary. We had common experiences, a collective identity, if you will. And it set us apart from the mainstream. So we basically congealed around that. That was our cultural cohesion. Now, the thing is, it looked good. It felt good. You know, people always reminisce about how, you know, we had all this brotherly and sisterly love back in the 1960s and 70s. But over what? What were we unified over? What is it that we were really doing? Because in actuality, in the 1950s, we were the most married group of people. You see, we had families, we had businesses, we had everything we needed. But somewhere in the 1970s and the 80s, our subculture, again, meshed with the dominant culture's subculture, and we embraced all of those things that went bad, including feminism. That took us down a long, dusty road. We embraced, sexual freedom for the women, and that caused the birth rate, out of wedlock birth rate to increase, and the STD rate. So that hasn't been good for us, the subculture. So again, what is it that we're embracing? Now, but again, the cultural cohesion was there. Now, and so people will always relate back to that, and they'll take it and they'll say, well, that must have been a good thing. But when you don't look at it in a historical context, you really don't understand. Now, the other thing is this. There's going to be a social stigma associated with a group of people who embrace the subculture, especially when that group of people is, for the most part, a tiny ethnic minority like the African American community is, which is only comprises about 14%. And of that 14%, a large group of people are what you would consider multiracial or biracial. And there's another group of people who are of African descent, but they might not be from the United States of America or what we would consider foundational Black American. But nevertheless, when you have that social stigma, then discrimination is going to follow, okay? It's going to come from the larger society. These people are a bunch of non-conformists, right? They have these unconventional behaviors. They reject the traditional norms. And so you can expect to be marginalized and misunderstood. You can even be demonized in the mainstream media, okay? Because the mainstream media is going to perceive you as a threat. But what have we done, right? Look at what we're doing. We embrace the drug dealer. We embrace the gangbanger. We embrace the derelicts and the degenerates in our community. We uplift the pimp as though he is some sort of great philosopher. Think about it. We did that. There was a time that, you got more respect and appreciation in the Black community as a dope boy and as a weed salesman than you did as a police officer. Think about that. Who's more accepted, the weed salesman or the cop in the Black community? Just think about that. And if you really are honest with each other and yourselves, you'll see what I'm telling you is the truth. So again, if it makes me the bad guy to embrace family values, law and order, patriotism, capitalism, then I'm gonna have to go ahead and be that guy. If being the bad guy means I'm gonna hold people accountable, whether they like it or not, I'm cool with that. Now the other thing that is gonna arise is that invariably, if you got a bunch of non-conformists, that might be cool for a minute, but even in that subgroup, like in the black community, it's gonna create conflict and tension. Okay, somebody type conflict and tension in the chat room. Okay, because even though you have some people rejecting societal norms and they're embracing these deviant behaviors, that's gonna create conflict because not everybody's gonna do that in the group. On top of that, you're gonna have external factors dealing with that. You're going to have people with different values and priorities and approaches coming in. And it's going to create internal strife. On one hand, you got the Pookie and Ray Rays. And on the other hand, you got the educated brothers. And the Pookie and Ray Rays mess it up. And then they want the educated brothers to come back in because we're all in the ethnic group. But the brothers are like, nah, I'm not doing that. You see, that's what we would consider the conservative element of the black community. Those men who sacrifice, who worked their way through trucking school, who stayed out of trouble, those who are electricians, those who are barbers, those who are plumbers, all these people, they worked their way through. And now you want them to come back and you non-conformists want them to come back to the subculture and put a Band-Aid on this bleeding wound. And they're not willing to do it. You see? So these are some of the things that you have to deal with when you embrace the subculture, which is degenerate. And you see it happening right now. Okay? The other thing is that you have to deal with social isolation. And again, as the black community is really just a tiny percentage of the dominant, tiny percentage of the population in the United States, isolation is bad. You get marginalized, which we've seen happen before. We get excluded from certain things, discriminated against, stigmatized by the larger society. And it leads to feelings of alienation and connection. And again, I know some of this is racial, but for the most part, what I found is, and when I dig into history and I look at black folks before the first and second migration of African Americans who came up from the South, and Thomas Sowell talks about this a lot. And you guys who haven't, I only recently discovered Thomas Sowell, but he talks extensively about how this Southern culture and the black folks who migrated to the North and who moved to the Midwest, they moved into the already established black enclaves, and they brought with them a degenerative culture. Now, when you look at cities like Detroit, back in, let's say 1910, okay, back in 1880, 1920, they already had established enclaves of prosperous black people, places like Indiana, Ohio, Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York. We had all of these educated people, Los Angeles, Oakland. We had people who had already been established. And for the most part, those people had worked into the dominant culture. They lived in places where there were other people who were middle class and upper middle class. And those people were white, even in other ethnicities, whether it be Italian and other Southern Europeans. But the bottom line is, we didn't begin to have the racial segregation again until the blacks who came from the South, who had inherited that degenerate culture from those Europeans who brought it over from those poor parts of Europe, specifically the outskirts of England and Scotland And they brought that degenerate culture to black folks in the South, and Southern black folks inherited it. The loudness, the vulgarity, they inherited it because that clearly is not African. Okay, Africans might be loud, but they're not loud like some of those rowdy folks from Ireland and Scotland. Okay, but black folks got that. Y'all should check out Thomas Sowell. Do that. And he talks about the degenerate culture that blacks inherited from those poor whites who moved in to the United States, moved into America. But bottom line is, those people had that culture. They then moved to those northern enclaves, those enclaves in the Midwest, those enclaves back east, those enclaves out west. And the white folks said, we got to get away from y'all. So what that lets me know is the social isolation is not solely associated with race, but it has a lot more to do with class and economic status. That's why even now, things are becoming a lot more integrated. And it's not so much based on being forced to. It's like people want to be around people with their own values. And so as long as you adhere to the African-American subculture, which embraces the degeneracy, you're going to suffer from social isolation. Now, and along with that, you're going to have to deal with a lot of economic disadvantages because nobody, if you're isolated, then you're going to have limited access to resources, which we suffer from. You're going to have limited opportunities, limited support networks, which we suffer from as a group. And, these unconventional behaviors, you got people twerking on tables. You got grown men walking around with their pants sagging. You got, I know this offends people. I know it offends people. But if you're a grown man and you got dreadlocks, and I'm not talking about the nice Rastafarian dreadlocks that are well kept, but you trying to work in an office job, you're going to get some pushback because it's non-conforming. It's a sign that you're a part of the subculture. It says a whole lot of other things. This person might be a weed smoker. This person might have all sort of degenerate behavior. This is what people assume. You don't have to like what I'm saying. I'm just telling you what people perceive. Every time you see one of these dudes with their pants sagging and the dreadlock, the cops call them mop heads or rag heads or something like that. So they already got a stereotype for you. And along with that comes a whole group of stereotypes. So if you're not out there clean cut and looking good, then people are going to have these perceptions of you. And I'm not saying that's going to always be the key, okay, to social acceptance. But at the end of the day, when we look at the civil rights movement, it was a reason that the organizers organized their marches on Sundays. The reason they did that is because that's when black folks were dressed at their best. And when those cameras from all these news networks from around the nation and the world saw these well-dressed people who had just came from church being brutalized by these savage police officers and their dogs and the water hoses from the fire department, it had a different effect than if you've seen a bunch of dudes running around with their pants sagging and their shirts off with their 9mm popping off in there. On one group, you saying, oh, let's protect those people. On the other group, you saying they must deserve it. That was the difference between the civil rights movement of the 1950s, okay, and the Black Lives Matter movement of the 2000s and 20s. And you don't have to like what I'm saying, but it's obvious. Nobody, the dominant society and most people around the world like, yeah, y'all out here raising hell. You don't look like civilized people. You just acting a fool. And I know you don't like what I'm saying, but again, I'm okay with being the bad guy. I'm cool with you all hating me for what I'm saying because it's the truth. And you need to have this mirror held up so that you can adjust and reflect and change. You understand what I'm saying? And of course, we can't forget the fact that if you out there cutting up and acting a fool, you out there misbehaving, and guess what? You're going to have some legal issues you have to deal with. Okay? And what did embracing what happened when we began to embrace the bad boy culture in the 1960s and the 1970s? We had a rise of what? Pimps. We had a rise of, you went from a hardworking, we went from embracing dad and mom and family to embracing degenerate behaviors, gangbanging. We embraced pimping and pandering. We embraced the drug culture. We embraced all that. And that landed a lot of folks in jail. That landed a strengthening, if you will, of the criminal justice system. And being the fact that we were already part of the subculture in our history here in the United States of having to deal with racism, we're already on the list of undesirables. So then what happens? Now we get targeted. We get targeted now. You see? And so this is what happens when you embrace the subculture. You want to be the tough guy. You want to embrace criminality because your subculture says that's acceptable. Now look at you. You want the bad boy. You want your sons to be bad boys. You find those men attractive. You cool with your sons out there getting the bag at all costs so they can buy you the bag, the Birkin bag. Well, your son is going to end up in prison, and so is your husband. A lot of these men that we say when they end up going to jail, there's no father, no. Who do you think they were out there trying to get the money for? Who do you think they were doing? The sister Shahrazad Ali pointed out the fact that for every black man who was out there selling dope in the 80s and 90s, there was a black woman who benefited from it. Because oftentimes they did it for their women. Black men have always loved black women in that regard, always willing to do for them. At the time slavery ended, it was black men walking all the way around the South to different places to try to gather their families back together. Even though we were slaves and we weren't officially married, we were still married. This is how much dedication the black man has to the family and to his woman. And so it would be nothing for him. Hey, my woman needs money. I'm going to go out here and do this, sell this dope. And she embraced that, became part of the subculture. And that's what happened. Now, you know, of course, along with the internal conflict, there are going to be people who say, again, this is not right, okay? You got one group of people saying the subculture is acceptable, we're rebelling against the system. You got another group of people saying, nah, that's not the way to do it. And so there are going to be disagreements on what priorities should be, what goals should be in the black community. There's going to create tensions. And so you have a person like me, I'll tell you all the time, I'm not all of y'all's brother. I don't want to be in solidarity with you. I don't want to be in cohesion with some of you. You see? I don't want to do a united front with all of y'all because I don't agree in where you're going. And when I say that, guess what? There's people try to put pressure, you know, but I don't care because, again, embrace being the bad guy. Somebody type, I am the bad guy in the chat room. You see? And so what happens after that? Well, you don't have cultural cohesion. You're going to end up with cultural erosion. All right? And so you're not going to be able to, well, let me say it like this. The black community has a unique cultural identity. Now, unlike any other group, we have a different cultural heritage. We were the only group of people who were forced to be brought to this country. We didn't come willingly, so we're not immigrants. And irrespective of what the YouTube gurus say, we weren't born and raised. We are not here for thousands and thousands of years. I know there's a lot of you pretendians out there who think that, you know, black folks are indigenous to this country, but the DNA and the fossil records indicate otherwise. It indicates that we are a group of West Africans who were brought to this country, who were bred on breeding farms, who after 1808, we went from 400,000 to a population of 4 million as a result of those breeding farms. And that was because the international slave trade was brought to an end because of laws put in place and treaties put in place between the United States and Great Britain, and they enforced that seriously. And so what ends up happening? Well, we still need this free labor. So what are we going to do? We're going to start mechanizing the breeding of these African slaves. So they would oftentimes pay or reward black women for having 12 babies. Sometimes they'd be no older than, 28 years old with 12 children. They would stud out black men. So this is how the population increased. But the bottom line is we have a very unique culture. But that very unique culture faces erosion now because of these external influences and these influences to assimilate. And then so you got one group of people saying, look, I want to assimilate with the dominant culture, right? And then you got the other group of people saying, no, you need to keep it real in the family. So you got your T.S. Johnson's, well, you got, no, I'm not saying, you got your Dr. Umar Johnson's on one side, and you got people like me on the other side. My position is you free to do whatever you want to do. I'm not really on the other side. I just want to see you be happy. And the reason I want you to be happy is because I don't want you to start lashing out against me and the others that look like me. Because at the end of the day, when a black man gets angry, he's not going to go take it out on somebody from another ethnicity. He's going to go do something harmful to his own people. And oftentimes it's a black man who he expends his rage on. So it's in my best interest to make sure you're happy. But on one side, you got the folks who are the Umar Johnsons who say, keep it real at all costs. We're going to stay on this dying ship. On the other end, you got these other fellas that say, if it ain't white, it ain't right. Understand me? They looking for snow bunny. They rather assimilate 100% all the way. Those are two opposing points. I'm just saying, man, do whatever you want to do, whatever keeps you happy, as long as you're not busting caps at me and mine. You understand me? But the bottom line is, when you have that sort of cultural erosion, then that particular group, just like ours, our ability to preserve and transmit our traditional customs to the children, to future generations, is compromised. Okay? And what does that do? It endangers continuity and the vitality of the culture and our legacy. You see what's happening. We at the point now, we don't even get along as a people at all. We don't get along. And because we don't get along, we can't come together. Then, we have a dying culture. That's why you got black men marrying out left and right. You got the lovely ladies over here talking about they about to divest. And this is what we dealing with. Because we can't agree on the direction that we can go. Now, I would say this. Let's go back to the culture that works. Let's go back to the culture of the 1950s. Where we believed in families, where we believed in staying together, where we didn't believe in divorce, and we didn't believe in having all these kids out of wedlock. And if you did, it happened, but it's not something that becomes the norm. But now you got something that's not good for society as a whole as a norm. It's not good. I don't think anybody listening to this broadcast will think that it's a good idea for a child to be raised without his daddy. I don't believe there's anybody in here who would think that's a good idea. I hope not. I hope you haven't got, and if you do, if you think you can raise a child without his daddy, then you are part of the subculture. And you've been brainwashed by those cultural norms. And that's where you're at. And that's part of the problem. If you think being a D-boy is something, if you embrace scammers, if any of you women say, I'd rather date a scammer, I'm in the dudes who are scammers, then you part of the subculture. You see what I'm saying? This is what I'm trying to say. You've embraced the subculture. Now, on the flip side, or should I say conversely, the bad guy in the subculture, myself, okay? The bad guy. I adhere to traditional values, okay? I believe in family. I believe in raising the children. I believe that the man should be the head of the house. Uh-oh. Somebody type toxic masculinity in the chat room. Somebody type patriarchy in the chat room. Somebody type radical male supremacist in the chat room. Right? That's what it is. Right? According to the subculture of the dominant society, I seek stability. Now this is gonna hit you in the bottom lip. Okay? This is gonna hit you in the bottom lip. I believe in stability so much. And when I say stability, I'm talking about the stability of the community, the stability of the nation. And the only way you can have a stable community and a stable nation is to have stable families. And the only way you can have a stable family is to have a viable man and a viable woman come together as a good husband and a good wife. If you have a group of people and they got the highest rate of divorce and they happen to be women, then that might be a group of women you want to stay away from. Should I name names, or do you already know the answer to that? Huh? Somebody type, probably not a good idea. Or just say not a good idea. So when I tell men, hey, go places and find women to make good wives, it's because I believe in stability of the family. And if you start off with a good wife and you're a good man, more likely you're going to have a longer marriage. And that longer lasting marriage is going to provide a more stable environment for those children because you have a stable family. And if you got a stable family, you're going to have stable neighborhoods, stable communities, stable cities, stable states, stable nations, stable countries. And so if that means as a bad guy, I have to tell the brothers to go out there and get some beautiful women from other countries who are going to be fit, feminine, and cooperative, and who are not going to undermine them, their authority as men. Because again, I'm one of those non-conformists in the black community, but in actuality, I'm a conformist in the dominant community or the dominant culture, which means I believe that irrespective of what color a woman is, if she's providing you what you need as a man to make a good family, you need to get with her and stay with her. That's the stability. And see, that makes me a bad guy because it doesn't matter to me if that woman is of another ethnicity, another color, another race, whatever. Now, I tell brothers all the time, my preference is for you to get black American women, African American women, women from the African continent, women from the West Indies, black women from South America, Central. That's my preference, to have a woman who is of African descent because you're black. And if you were white, I would say, hey, man, get you a woman who's white. If you're Asian, get you a woman who's Asian. If you got a particular group, you a Thai guy, get you a Thai woman. Because I believe in cultural cohesion. Because again, I believe in seeking stability. But if that's not available to you, if you've searched, you can't find that, I understand. My main thing is you got a short time limit on this planet. You don't have a whole lot of time to be out there trying to search for a good woman and she fits a particular niche. If that's not available, just go where they got plenty of good wives, get you one, have some children, create some stable families, and be happy. That's what I want for you, man. I want you to be family men. I want you to be happy family men with stable housings. And believe it or not, all these dudes talking about this blackity black stuff on the internet, and you should put black, especially the men. Trust me, especially many of them have women who would you not consider of African descent. And I'm the only one of the ones telling you that's my preference for you. But if you can't find it, I understand. And I know that makes a lot of you brothers mad, okay? Because some of you brothers are angry with our lovely ladies, but I'm not angry with them. I just recognize the issues. And until they begin to be willing to compete for black men, then, you know, they got to deal with the consequences of being left out. Nevertheless, you know, as the bad guy, you deal, as I said, I'm pro traditional values. I'm pro seeking stability. I told you that. I'm an advocate for respectability, which means I don't want to see our women out there fighting at the Walmart. I don't want to see our sons out there with their pants sagging, smoking weed, and going in and out the penitentiary. I don't want to see that. Okay? I don't want to see that. And some of y'all are saying, well, that's just respectability politics. And many of you see that as a sign of weakness or complicity, okay, with the system, right? A system that you perceive as corrupt or flawed, right? And individuals like me who conform with societal norms, you try to ostracize me or criticize me, you see? Because I lack the willingness to or I'm not willing to go against this system which you say is broken, okay, and in need of radical change. That's in the subculture. You see, in the African American subculture, that's considered radical. In the main culture, traditional values is the norm. You see, because again, in a subculture where non-conformity is celebrated, like in the Black American community, challenging traditional values is the norm. And individuals who adhere to traditional values like stability, respectability, were viewed as the bad guys. While individuals who uphold those substandard societal norms, right, guess what? They the good guys. You see? So, you know, I'm cool with the ostracism. I'm cool with the criticism and the shaming. You don't have to accept what I say, and I'm cool with the pushback, right? And but you got to understand, no matter how much pressure you put on me, I'm not going to conform to the subculture because I know it works. So when I tell you things like women who get with men who they know are bad, they need to accept responsibility for that. Somebody type accountability in the chat room. When I tell you the dudes who go out there and you listen to the hoopla and you decide that you want to commit crimes and go down that route, then you get what you deserve. And if you end up in somebody's jail cell, that's on you. But the thing is, the men are, you know, it's easy for them to understand that. And I went very far once. I told you, if I was in charge of taking care of these Pookies and Ray Rays, I'd take them into the middle of the street and get rid of them. Period. I don't have a problem with it because I know it's the right thing to do for society. You see? A lot of people don't like that. But again, those are people who adhere to the subculture. Those are people who believe that Pookie and Ray Ray is somehow our hero. They believe those are our soldiers. You see? I believe in strong families. I believe in a strong military. I believe in strong borders. I believe in the right to protect yourself. I believe in disciplining children. I believe in cooperative, fit, feminine, submissive wives. I believe in strong, dominant, masculine men who take care of business and don't complain. That's what I believe in. I believe in God. And I believe in God's word. See? So these are the things that make me the bad guy in the black community. And many of you all, having listened to me, you feel the same way. You feel the same heat. Some of you guys are so tired of it. You're taking your passports and you're going somewhere where you can escape this subculture, because if you're in the United States, no matter where you are, people assume you adhere to the subculture because that's our stereotypical reputation. And so you guys are done. You out. You get up out of here. You headed off to Thailand and the Dominican Republic and Colombia right now, because at least down there, the subculture is still on the outs. Here, we've embraced the subculture. Here, the subculture has the loudest voice. And that's not just in the black community. It's throughout the dominant society. It's about the major, the grander society has allowed the subculture to outtalk us and grab all the media and grab the movie and the TV shows and push their narratives. But I think we push them back, just like I'm doing. So embrace being the bad guy, fellas. And on top of embracing being the bad guy, be the heel, okay? Be that guy. Embrace it and reap the benefits from it, because it definitely gives you clarity of thought and a certain level of freedom that you can't get if you're a member of that subculture or conformity, if you conform with the subculture.